Ethan Walker had taken so many business trips in his life that airports felt like second homes. But on that early morning flight from Seattle to Toronto, something felt different the moment he stepped onto the plane. It wasn't the weather or the long line of tired travelers. It was a quiet feeling inside him, a sense that this trip carried a meaning he did not yet understand. Ethan wasn't a man who got nervous easily. But as he found his seat near the window, he felt an unusual heaviness in his chest. Like life was trying to tell him something. He placed his laptop bag under the seat and leaned back, hoping for a few hours of silence. His last few weeks had been a blur of meetings, deadlines, and empty evenings spent alone in his apartment. Even though his career was steady, something in his personal life felt hollow. He was beginning to realize that success meant very little when there was no one to share it with. But he pushed the thought aside. A business trip wasn't the place for emotional reflection. While adjusting his seatbelt, Ethan noticed someone across the aisle, a woman in her early 30s, quiet eyes and an expression that suggested she was lost in thoughts of her own. She wasn't wearing bright colors, wasn't putting on a show, wasn't even trying to make conversation with anyone. Yet something about her presence caught Ethan's attention. Maybe it was the way she stared out the window with a soft sadness, or the way she held her coffee cup with both hands as if trying to warm a part of herself that life had left cold for too long. Her name, he would soon learn, was Claire Matthews. Though at that moment they were simply strangers sharing the same air, the same flight, and unknowingly, the same sense of loneliness. When the plane began to roll down the runway, Claire turned her face toward the window, her fingers lightly tapping the armrest. She looked calm on the outside, but her body language revealed a different story. Her shoulders were tight, and every movement of the plane seemed to make her shift slightly in her seat. Ethan tried not to stare, but when their eyes met for the first time, she offered him a small, polite smile, one filled with a quiet sadness. That made him wonder what she was carrying in her heart. The plane lifted off the ground, and for a few minutes everything felt normal. Ethan pulled out his tablet, tapped through a few emails, and tried to distract himself from the fatigue sitting behind his eyes. But then the plane hit turbulence sharp enough to make the overhead bins rattle. Claire instantly reached for the armrest with both hands, her face tightening. Without thinking, Ethan leaned slightly forward and said softly, "It's okay. It'll pass in a minute." It wasn't a dramatic moment, and he didn't say it with the intention of impressing her. It was simply human instinct, one person offering comfort to another. Claire looked at him again, not with embarrassment, but with relief. "I'm not the best with turbulence," she admitted quietly. Ethan nodded. "Most people aren't. You're doing fine." The plane steadied, but something about that small exchange stayed in the air between them, gentle, unspoken, yet strangely meaningful. Claire let out a slow breath and relaxed back into her seat, though she still held the armrest lightly. Ethan returned to his tablet, but somehow he felt more awake than before. As the flight continued, the cabin lights dimmed, and the early morning darkness outside gave way to soft streaks of sunlight. Ethan glanced across the aisle a few times, not in a way that would make Claire uncomfortable, but with quiet curiosity. There was something about her that felt familiar, even though he had never seen her before. She had the look of someone who had been through something difficult recently, heartbreak, major life change, or maybe a loss. Whatever it was, it made her seem both fragile and strong at the same time. After about an hour, Claire pulled out a notebook and wrote something on the first page, then quickly closed it as if she had written something too personal to leave open. She stared at the closed notebook for a few seconds, then placed it gently back into her bag. Ethan didn't know her story, but he could feel that she had one. And it was probably more painful than she wanted anyone to know. A flight attendant passed by with drinks, and Claire quietly ordered water. Her voice was soft but steady, and when she thanked the attendant, she gave another small smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes. The rest of the passengers seemed lost in their own worlds, some sleeping, some watching movies, some scrolling endlessly on their phones. But for Ethan and Claire, the silence carried a different kind of weight. They were strangers. Yes, but something connected them. even if only for a brief moment in time, near the end of the flight. The captain announced they would be landing in 20 minutes. People began gathering their things, fixing their hair, stretching their legs. Claire looked out the window again, her eyes reflecting the skyline of Toronto as the plane descended through the clouds. She turned slightly, meeting Ethan's gaze once more. This time there was a hint of exhaustion mixed with gratitude for the stranger, cool, who had spoken kindly when she needed it most. Even though he didn't know her story, didn't know the weight she had been carrying. Thanks again. For earlier, she said gently. Ethan shook his head. Really, it was nothing. But somehow, it wasn't nothing. The wheels touched down smoothly, and the passengers broke into the usual shuffle of gathering bags and stretching stiff legs. Claire stood up, slinging her coat over her arm. Ethan did the same. For a brief second, it felt like they were about to say goodbye forever to people who met by chance and would never cross paths again. But fate had other plans, because as they stepped off the plane, walked through the terminal, and headed toward the exit, Ethan realized something surprising. Claire was walking toward the same conference hotel shuttle he was, and whether he wanted it or not, the story between them was only just beginning. Ethan didn't expect to see Claire again after the flight, but when he stepped outside the terminal and noticed her walking toward the same hotel shuttle, he felt a strange pull inside, something between surprise and quiet relief. They exchanged a small, almost shy smile, the kind of people give when fate insists on crossing their paths twice in one day. Without planning it, they ended up sitting near each other on the shuttle. No conversation, just a comfortable silence that didn't feel forced or awkward. It felt natural, as if life was gently nudging them in the same direction. Toronto's tall glass buildings rose in the distance, shining in the late morning sun. The city looked alive and busy, full of motion, but inside that small shuttle, Ethan and Claire felt oddly calm. The driver played soft radio music, the kind that filled the background without disturbing anyone. Claire stared out the window, and Ethan noticed her face relax for the first time since the turbulence on the plane. Her shoulders dropped slightly. Her hands rested loosely in her lap. She looked lighter when the shuttle stopped in front of the hotel, an enormous building with silver windows reflecting the sky. They stepped out together. Inside the lobby, the crowd of conference attendees buzzed around them, checking in, grabbing welcome packets, talking loudly. But Ethan and Claire stood just a few feet apart, both looking a little overwhelmed by the chaos. The receptionist handed them room keys and schedules for the conference events. Claire glanced at her papers, sighed softly, then accidentally caught Ethan looking. She smiled faintly, like she was letting herself breathe for the first time that day. Long day already. Ethan asked. Her smile grew a little. Feels like I've been traveling for a week. He nodded, understanding more than he said. It'll get better. Okay. She gave a small, appreciative nod before heading to the elevators. Ethan watched her step inside, unsure why he felt the urge to say something more. But the doors closed before he could speak. Later that afternoon, the conference began with the usual introductions, presentations, and overly long speeches. People sat in neatly arranged rows, pretending to be fully interested. Ethan tried to focus, but his mind kept drifting back to Claire, her quiet sadness, her polite smile, the way she held herself like someone trying to heal from something she hadn't quite named yet. During a short break, he grabbed a coffee from the refreshment table and scanned the crowd. He didn't expect to find her, yet there she was, standing alone near a tall window, holding a cup of tea and staring out at the busy street below. She looked peaceful but distant, as if her thoughts were somewhere far away. Ethan walked over slowly, not wanting to seem intrusive. Tea instead of coffee? He asked lightly. She turned, surprised but not unhappy to see him. Coffee makes me more nervous than awake, she said with a small laugh. He chuckled. Understandable. They talked a bit nothing deep at first. Just simple things. Where they were from, what they did for work, what brought them to the conference. Claire spoke softly, choosing her words carefully, like she was afraid of saying too much. Ethan listened closely, realizing he had missed the feeling of having a conversation that wasn't rushed or forced. When they returned to the main hall, he found himself sitting near her again. Not directly beside Herge, close enough that their shared presence felt comforting. She didn't seem bothered by it. In fact, she looked almost relieved not to be sitting alone. After the final session of the day, people split off into small groups for dinner or drinks. Ethan wasn't planning to join anyone. He usually ordered room service and called it a night. But when he saw Claire walking toward the exit alone, a gentle impulse pushed him forward. "Are you heading out?" he asked. Claire hesitated, then nodded. "I was thinking of grabbing something simple to eat. Nothing fancy. Just a quiet dinner." Ethan smiled. "Same here." She paused, a thoughtful look crossing her face as if she was trying to decide whether to invite him or let the moment pass. Finally, she said softly, "If you want, we could go together." He didn't let the invitation hang in the air too long. "I'd like that." They walked to a small restaurant, a block away, a warm place with soft lighting, wooden tables, and a calm atmosphere that felt perfect for two tired strangers. The server seated them near the window, where the evening city lights glowed like tiny stars. They ordered simple meals. Nothing fancy, nothing loud. And as the food arrived, their conversation shifted into something more honest, more personal. Claire spoke about her recent breakup not with anger or bitterness, but with sadness she was still learning to carry. "It was 5 years," she said quietly, looking down at her hands. "I thought we were planning a future. Turns out we were planning very different ones." Ethan didn't interrupt. He simply listened. She needed that more than anything. "I'm not angry at him," she continued. "I'm angry at myself for not listening to my own heart sooner." Her voice trembled slightly, but not enough to draw attention. She wasn't trying to be dramatic. She was simply telling her truth. Ethan nodded, feeling a deep respect for her honesty. It takes strength to walk away from something familiar. She looked up, meeting his eyes. "Sometimes I don't feel strong. I feel lost." Ethan held her gaze, offering a calm reassurance. "Everyone feels lost sometimes. You're not alone in that." A soft silence followed, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that makes two people realize they understand each other without needing to explain everything. After dinner, they walked back to the hotel. The night air was cool, the city around them buzzing softly, but everything between them felt warm. When they reached the elevators, Claire hesitated for a small moment, just long enough to show she wasn't ready for the evening to end. But she didn't overstep. She simply gave him a gentle smile. "Thank you for tonight," she said. "Anytime." Ethan replied. She stepped into the elevator and the doors began to close. For a brief second, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, a quiet spark of connection. Soft but unmistakable. He watched the elevator rise, wondering why a simple dinner with a stranger felt more meaningful than anything he had experienced in years. But he didn't know yet that the next day would change everything. The next morning came faster than Ethan expected. The hotel curtains barely held back the sunlight, and the alarm on his phone felt louder than usual. He got ready quickly, trying to shake off the strange mix of excitement and worry he felt. Last night's dinner with Claire had stayed in his thoughts longer than he wanted to admit. He kept replaying her soft smile, the honesty in her voice, the quiet strength she didn't realize she had. When he entered the conference hall, he saw her almost instantly. Claire was standing near the registration table, holding a folder and speaking with one of the organizers. But something about her expression was different, more distant, more unsettled. Her eyes were gentle but tired, as if she had spent most of the night thinking about something difficult. Ethan waited until she finished talking, then walked toward her. "Morning," he said softly. Claire looked up and forced a small smile. It wasn't the warm smile she gave him last night. This one carried worry. "Morning, Ethan." He studied her face for a moment. "You okay?" She hesitated before answering. "Not really." They moved to a quieter corner of the hall, away from the noise of people greeting each other and grabbing coffee. Claire wrapped her arms around herself lightly, as if she was trying to hold her feelings steady. "My ex called me last night," she said quietly. Ethan felt something inside him tighten, though he tried not to show it. "Oh," Claire nodded slowly. He said he regrets what happened. He wants to meet. He wants to talk about getting back together. Her voice didn't sound excited or happy. She sounded confused, torn, maybe even afraid. Ethan didn't know what to say at first. He didn't want to overstep. They weren't anything more than two people who had shared a meaningful conversation. Yet the thought of her going back to someone who had hurt her stirred something deep inside him. "Do you want to?" he finally asked, keeping his voice calm. Claire shook her head immediately, then stopped, unsure. "I don't know. Part of me feels like I should hear him out. 5 years is a long time to walk away from without giving it another try." "And the other part?" Ethan asked gently. She looked down at her hands. "The other part feels like I've already tried too hard for too long." They stood there quietly for a moment, both absorbing the weight of her words. Ethan wanted to tell her she deserved better kindness, stability, someone who actually valued her. But he didn't want to sound like he was speaking for his own feelings. So he stayed silent, giving her space. The conference resumed and they took their seats, but the easy comfort they shared the night before had faded. Claire seemed lost in her thoughts, her eyes flicking toward her phone every few minutes as if expecting another message. Ethan tried to focus on the presentations, but everything sounded blurry. Every time he glanced at her, he saw the stress in her posture, the way her fingers tapped the pen. It's the way she pressed her lips together when she was overthinking. During lunch, she sat with a group of coworkers, smiling politely but clearly distracted. Ethan didn't join them. He needed space to figure out why her situation affected him so much. He barely knew her, yet he felt protective of her. He admired her honesty, her quiet strength, her kindness. And somewhere inside him, he feared she would let herself be pulled back into something that had already broken her. Later that afternoon, during a coffee break, Claire walked toward him. This time, she looked more fragile than before, like someone who had spent hours fighting with her own heart. "Can we talk?" she asked. They stepped outside onto a small balcony behind the conference center. The air was cool and the city noise echoed softly around them. Claire leaned on the railing and took a slow breath. "I feel like I'm standing at a door I don't want to open but don't know how to walk away from," she said. "Everyone keeps telling me that people make mistakes, that relationships deserve second chances. Only if they're healthy," Ethan replied gently. She looked at him, searching his face as if trying to understand something unspoken. "You think I shouldn't go back?" He held her gaze, careful with his words. "I think you deserve happiness. Real happiness. Not something that hurts you and then asks for forgiveness only when it's convenient." Claire's eyes softened. She didn't smile, but she looked almost relieved that someone had said what she couldn't say herself. "I'm scared of choosing wrong. What if I regret it?" "Sometimes," Ethan said quietly, "regret comes from staying too long where you don't belong." That sentence hit her harder than he expected. Her breath caught slightly, and she looked away, blinking back the tension in her eyes. She wasn't crying, she just looked like someone finally seeing the truth she had avoided. They stayed out there for several minutes without speaking. The wind moved through her hair gently, and Ethan looked at her, realizing just how much he cared about someone he had only known for 2 days. Eventually, Claire straightened up. "Thank you," she said softly, "for being honest. For listening." "Always," he replied without thinking. The rest of the day passed slowly. Neither of them said much, but the quiet between them wasn't cold. It was thoughtful, heavy with emotions neither of them fully understood yet. When the evening came, Ethan returned to his room, expecting the day to end quietly. But then a soft knock at his door. He opened it and found Claire standing there, arms wrapped around herself, eyes gentle but uncertain. "I didn't want to be alone with my thoughts tonight," she whispered. Ethan stepped aside to let her in. She didn't sit right away. She walked to the window, staring at the city lights for a moment, as if gathering the courage to speak. "I think I already know the answer," she said softly. "I think I know I shouldn't go back. But it scares me to admit it." Ethan moved closer, but carefully keeping a respectful distance. "You don't have to decide everything tonight. Just be honest with yourself." Claire turned to him, her expression tender and vulnerable. "It's strange," she said. I barely know you, but talking to you feels safe. He felt something warm spread through his chest at her words. They talked for hours not about her ex, but about life, dreams, hopes, and fears. Nothing romantic, nothing crossing boundaries, just two people connecting deeply. Learning each other in a way that felt natural and honest. When it grew late, Ethan walked her to her room. She paused at her door, her hand on the handle, and looked at him with soft gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded. "Good night, Claire." She entered her room and the door closed gently. Ethan stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of the day settle in his heart. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. He didn't know what Claire would decide. But he knew one thing. Whatever came next would change everything for both of them. The final morning of the conference arrived faster than Ethan expected. The hotel was quiet, the soft hum of the air conditioning filling the hallways as he stepped out of his room. The past 2 days had been unlike any he'd experienced on a business trip. What began as ordinary work travel had turned into something that felt far deeper. He dressed quickly, trying to push down the nervous energy in his chest, though he knew it wouldn't fade until he saw Claire again. He found her in the lobby, suitcase by her side, dressed neatly but with a softness that made her look approachable and real. Her eyes held the same gentle vulnerability he had noticed before, but now there was a hint of determination too. She smiled faintly when she saw him. It wasn't the casual smile of a stranger. It was one that carried gratitude and unspoken connection. "Morning," he said, keeping his voice calm even though his heart raced. "Morning," she replied, her voice soft but steady. There was a pause, a brief hesitation, and then she spoke again. "I called him." Ethan felt a subtle twist in his chest, the moment of fear he hadn't wanted to admit. "Your ex?" he asked quietly, careful not to betray his feelings. She nodded. "I told him I'm not coming back. I told him I'm done." Her words were quiet but firm, each one carrying the weight of her choice. She looked at him, searching for some sign that her decision was right. Ethan felt a surge of relief and pride. "That's really brave," he said. "I'm proud of you." Claire looked away for a second, taking a slow breath. "I realize that I don't want to go backward. I've spent enough time there. This trip, meeting you, it helped me see that. I don't want to repeat the past." Ethan didn't know what to say at first. He had expected sadness, hesitation, or regret, but here she was, standing before him, open and honest, choosing her own path. Something in him softened, a quiet warmth spreading through his chest. He had felt a connection with her from the first flight, but now it had become clear that it was something real, something rooted in trust and understanding, not just fleeting attraction. Outside, the city of Toronto was alive with movement. Cars honked softly in the distance. People hurried along sidewalks, and the air smelled faintly of coffee and early morning streets. It was ordinary, yet the moment between them felt extraordinary. Two strangers had crossed paths by chance, and now their lives had shifted in ways neither could ignore. Claire's eyes met his again, more steady now. "Do you think we could keep in touch?" Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from hope. It was the kind of hope that feels fragile yet irresistible. Ethan felt an instant understanding of what she meant, not a promise, not a declaration of love, just an invitation to continue discovering something rare. "I'd like that," he said, and it wasn't a simple, polite answer. There was depth in his tone, a quiet honesty. "More than you know." They exchanged numbers, holding their phones in a brief, almost ceremonial gesture that felt far more significant than it should. It wasn't a grand romantic gesture, but it carried weight. It meant that both were willing to take a step forward, not recklessly, not with unrealistic expectations, but with openness and trust. Claire smiled again, this time more freely. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and looked at Ethan as if seeing him clearly for the first time. "Thank you," she said simply, but the meaning behind it was vast. "Thank you for listening, for understanding, for being there when it mattered, without asking for anything in return." Ethan nodded. "Thank you for trusting me. That means a lot." Her cab arrived and she hesitated for a second before opening the door. It was the kind of hesitation that carries the weight of unspoken feelings. The recognition of a connection that has begun but is still fragile. She gave him one last look, soft and promising. Before sliding into the seat, Ethan watched as the cab pulled away, the city lights reflecting on its shiny black roof. There was no dramatic goodbye, no rushed declarations of love. Just a quiet acknowledgement that something important had started. Something neither of them had expected when the trip began. And in that quiet moment, Ethan felt a warmth he hadn't realized he'd been missing. It's an emotional clarity that came from truly connecting with another person. As the cab disappeared from view, Ethan turned back toward the hotel, a small smile on his face. The day continued as ordinary travelers came and went, but inside him, something extraordinary had taken root. He felt lighter, more present, more alive. The conference, the work, the obligations, all of it seemed less urgent. Now, because he had discovered something that mattered more than anything else: connection, honesty, and the quiet courage to choose what felt right in life. He didn't know what the future held. They were miles apart in different cities with busy lives and responsibilities waiting for them. Yet, for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt hopeful. Hopeful not for perfection, not for instant fulfillment, but for something real and honest, a chance to build slowly, carefully, meaningfully. That morning marked an ending and a beginning simultaneously. An ending of past regrets, of choices made out of fear or habit, and a beginning of possibilities shaped not by circumstance, but by the quiet decisions of two people willing to be brave with their hearts. The experience of meeting Claire, sharing their thoughts, and supporting one another without judgment had changed Ethan in ways he hadn't expected. He realized that life sometimes gives moments that feel small at first: a shared smile, a listening ear, a few hours of honesty, but their impact can last far longer than anyone could imagine. As he sat back in the hotel lobby, sipping a cup of coffee he didn't even taste, Ethan reflected on how the past days had unfolded. From a turbulent flight to shared dinners to quiet conversations on hotel balconies, each moment had been a stepping stone. Each moment had led to the clarity of today, the understanding that life can surprise you, that connection can appear when you least expect it, and that sometimes the people you meet on what seems like an ordinary trip can leave an extraordinary mark on your life. Ethan's thoughts lingered on Claire's words, her gentle smile, her courage. He knew they would continue to text, call, maybe meet again. But beyond logistics, it was something deeper: a recognition that life-changing experiences don't always come with fireworks or drama. Sometimes they arrive quietly, in small gestures, soft conversations, and mutual respect. And that quiet change often lasts far longer than moments of excitement ever could. The rest of the day moved forward. Ethan attended the final sessions of the conference, took notes, exchanged business cards, and participated in the usual networking chatter. Yet nothing felt routine anymore. Each handshake, each conversation reminded him of the unexpected depth he had found in someone who had arrived in his life like a gentle breeze, unassuming but impactful. The memory of last night's talk, the bravery Claire had shown in choosing her own path, stayed with him. By the time the conference ended, Ethan felt a quiet confidence. He had come on this trip expecting work and meetings, nothing more. Instead, he left with the realization that meaningful human connection could change the way he viewed his life, his priorities, and his own heart. He understood that love, attraction, or emotional closeness didn't always announce itself with loud gestures. Sometimes it began with understanding, trust, and a willingness to be present for someone else, even in the smallest ways. That evening, as he packed his things and prepared for his flight back to Seattle, Ethan thought about the future. Claire's image lingered in his mind, not as an obsession, not as a distraction, but as a reminder that life can offer beauty when least expected. He had experienced a brief but profound encounter that had opened his eyes, not to perfection, but to possibility. The cab arrived to take him to the airport, and as he watched the city streets pass by, he felt a sense of gratitude he hadn't felt in years. This business trip, which began as ordinary and routine, had become life-changing. And even though goodbyes had been quiet and soft, they carried a weight that would stay with him for a long time, a reminder that sometimes life gives you exactly what you need just when you least expect it. Ethan smiled gently as the airport approached, knowing that endings don't always mean closure. They can also be beginnings. And for him, this trip marked the start of a chapter filled with hope, connection, and the possibility of something real and meaningful, built not on urgency or drama, but on trust, honesty, and the courage to choose one's own path.